There's a growing and insidious trend in right-wing media, broadcast, print, and social media. It is to take highly misleading and selectively edited videos of President Biden directly from Republican National Committee social media accounts and then use those videos to spread messages virally to cast doubt on President Biden's fitness for office. Here is this headline from the New York Post, quote, Biden appears to freeze up, has to be led off stage by Obama at Megabucks LA fundraiser. The full video, posted by Biden finance chair on Twitter, shows something entirely different. Biden reacting to applause and then walking off stage with former President Obama. It comes less than 1 week after the New York Post made a cover out of another piece of deceptively edited tape, calling him Meanderer-in-Chief due to what they claim was Biden walking away during a skydiving demonstration during the G7 summit last week. The only problem is that the full video, which emerged almost instantly, shows Biden was going over to congratulate one of the skydivers who's cropped out of the video entirely. Both the articles are based on cheap fakes, videos of real events that are intentionally manipulated to fool viewers, released on an RNC opposition research social media account with zero independent fact-checking by these so-called journalists and spread throughout the right-wing ecosystem. And we would take the hand-wringing by right-wing media about Biden's mental fitness in videos intentionally manipulated to make him look unfit, maybe a little more seriously if they weren't radio silent about the repeated, glaring, and real mental lapses happening behind podiums and on camera on the part of Donald Trump. Remember his story about his cognitive test, acing it over and over again? He told the story again over the weekend with a vital, glaring mistake. Listen.
I said, doctor, you know Dr. Ronnie, right? Ronnie, do you know Ronnie? Ronnie Jackson?
I said to the doctor, it was Dr. Ronnie Jackson.
The White House doctor, Jackson, Ronnie Jackson.
Dr. Ronnie Johnson. Does everyone know Ronnie Johnson, congressman from Texas?
I love Doc Ronnie. I love Doc Ronnie. But I said, what do you think about a cognitive test, Ronnie?
They ask it to you. They give you 5 names and you have to repeat them.
Sir, I'm going to give you 6 names. Good. They look at them. A chair, a hat, a badge, a necklace.
A light. A group of people. Ohio. A giraffe, a tiger, or this, or that. A whale. Which one is the whale?
Person, woman, man, camera, TV. They say, that's amazing. How did you do that?
I aced it twice. I aced it, and I aced it. I aced both of them. Aced it. I aced it. Every question right.
Claire, Eddie, Tim, and Andrew are back. I mean, Eddie, I don't love covering this, but Trump is forcing the issue. And let me just say this about the test he's taking. It's like a sober person taking the DUI test, right? Like, he shouldn't be bragging about acing the screen for dementia unless he's aware of something that he's trying to keep from his supporters. What do we make of this? What do we think of this? How do we cover this? What are your thoughts, Eddie Glaude?
I mean, you know, I've been trying to process it from the last segment to now. We know who this guy is. We know his character. We know the danger that he presents. And we also know that millions of Americans support him. We can come up with ads. We can disclose or illustrate his failings, his cognitive decline. We can do all of that. And we still know that millions of Americans support him. And so, you know, what I was thinking about in relation to the last segment and in this segment, Nicole, is that we keep presuming that these are rational actors. Even the low information voters, we're saying that if only they got more information, they will then make the rational decision. Now, we have to conclude that this guy at the top of the ticket of the Republican Party, something is not right. And I'm not saying that they're irrational, but there are passions at work here. And we keep arguing on the grounds of rational decision-making when there's this existential question at the heart of his success and ascendance, and passions are animating it. There are folk who support this guy, even with this evidence, because they feel they're losing control of the country. And we got to address that, it seems to me, Nicole, if we're going to get to the heart of the rot.
Well, Tim, Eddie, of course, bottom line this for all of us. I think there are 2 things to do here. I mean, one, it is time to allow the hardened base to be the hardened base and to just stop with it. I mean, I was part of, I went out and I think I did 20 packages, 20 pieces. In Trump They Trust was the name of the series. And it was an honor to do it. And I loved understanding the Trump voter. But I went back after Flynn was fired. I went back after Mueller was tapped. And I think we knew in early 2017 that there's nothing that can make the hardened base that loves Trump not love him anymore. But Trump knows that isn't enough, right? That's why Trump keeps taking the Mocha test from behind podiums, because Trump sees something in his own data that being a convicted felon, that his own diminished performance, he's not this. I mean, those clips interspersed from 16 to 24, he is a different candidate in 24 than he was in 16, and he seems to know it.
I think for sure, and I absolutely agree with that. I also want to say I totally agree with Eddie. I was thinking the same thing during the commercial break. We're on the same page. It is disheartening, right? I was on my only vacation of the year last week, and to come back and to have to do this with this lunatic, have to watch that clip, sit there and be like, how is this person? How are we in a place where, after all we've been discussing this hour, 47% of the country is still going to want this person to be president? It's extremely disheartening and it's frustrating. But, we can't just be made tired by it, right? You have to figure out, okay, how can you keep it at 47 or 46 so we don't have to deal with a second Trump presidency? And I think that in this clip, the important thing to discuss here is 2 points. One is, you mentioned the New York Post twice. It's the Murdochs that are doing this. And we have to just say it. And it is the Murdochs that are advancing this stuff. It's happening on Fox. It's happening now in the New York Post. It was only 2 years ago where the Murdochs, like Mitch McConnell, like everybody else, saw Trump for who he was, made fun of him on the front page of the New York Post. Remember, Florida Man makes an announcement when Trump announces his speech. Well, now they're doing Florida Man's propaganda for him again, all right, because they want to have access. And so I think it's important to call that out. And number two, it's important to shame this person and call him back, because it's nice to fact check and correct the record about the Joe Biden videos. You have to do that, I guess. But really, the only way to fight fire with fire is to show people the real video of Trump, and to do that in all of the different venues that we've been discussing this hour. And that's going to be a job for the campaign and the media and all the allies in the pro-democracy coalition.
Well, Tim, I'm going to press you again. I mean,
Please.
Even the corrected videos, I mean, a fraction of the people who saw the manipulated ones would have seen the full video. I went and looked for it because I said, this can't be. I've sat across from him. There's got to be more. So what is the fire with fire? Because this is where I love what I've seen in terms of the paid messages from the Biden campaign. I am concerned about what you just described, that the fire with fire competes with, should we be on the high road or the low road? And I really, 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 really hope that they understand that the election will not be won or lost on the high road. It will be won or lost by getting on the low road and pushing back against the, crap that they're putting out there about President Biden. Say more about how you do that.
Yeah, look, I'm not happy with this either. I'm with you. It's the same thing. You're doing it on this show. We at the Bulwark, there was a video from 2 weeks ago where they stopped it right before Biden sat down and made it look like he was paused in midair, which if you just run it one more second, you saw he was sitting down. We ran the corrected video on there. But again, the number of people that see it is going to be fewer. That's just the nature of the communications business. That's the nature of disinformation. So what is it? Donald Trump's got to be in people's faces. I mean, every time Donald Trump is talking, he is saying stupid stuff. He is saying extreme things that people that are not popular. He doesn't look good, by the way. Let's just be honest. The face that has gone from orange to burnt sienna. Everyone, you can get the videos from Mar-a-Lago where you see the real Donald Trump underneath the burnt sienna face. They've got to mock him. And they've got to make him look like what he is, which is a increasingly deranged elderly person that is a convict. And you got to do it with short videos that people are going to laugh at on TikTok. I mean, it's not the high road. It's not the Lincoln Douglas debates, but it's our reality.
The Biden campaign coming out swinging this morning, wielding the most powerful rhetorical weapon there is against Donald Trump, the plain and simple truth. Team Biden calling out the disgraced, convicted, twice impeached, 4 times indicted, liable for sexual abuse and financial fraud ex-president for being, well, all those things. A brand new ad, part of a $50 million ad buy set to air in key battleground states starting immediately, says Americans face a clear choice in November. Watch.
In the courtroom, we see Donald Trump for who he is. He's been convicted of 34 felonies, found liable for sexual assault, and he committed financial fraud. Meanwhile, Joe Biden's been working, lowering health care costs and making big corporations pay their fair share. This election is between a convicted criminal who's only out for himself and a president who's fighting for your family.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
So the message comes at a time when there are some signs out there that as much as Trump would like us to believe that he wears his convicted felon status as some sort of badge of honor, a pretty vital slice of the electorate, the one that still resides here on Earth One with the rest of us, sees his conviction for what it is. A poll of all adults from Ipsos and Politico reveals that 53% of independent voters believe that Trump is guilty of the charges in the hush money election interference case. And, quote, 21% of independents said the conviction makes them less likely to support Trump and said that it would be an important factor in their vote. In a close election, small shifts among independent and swing voters could determine the outcome. Now, while the Biden campaign is driving home the fact that the presumptive Republican presidential nominee is a convicted felon, President Joe Biden is also sounding the alarm on what could happen to our country if that convicted felon is handed another term as the country's president. Speaking at a fundraiser in Los Angeles alongside President Obama, President Joe Biden told the crowd that Trump has no regard for the rule of law in America. On that, the Washington Post reports that Biden said this, quote, institutions matter. What he did on January 6th, and now he's literally saying if he doesn't win, there will be a bloodbath. It's outrageous. What he's talking about is outrageous. The idea that he's actually threatened retribution, this is the United States of America. Did you ever think you'd ever hear anything like this? Also, an audio obtained by MSNBC, President Biden also mused about the possibility, if Trump were to win again, of more Trump appointees sitting on the nation's highest court. That court already has one justice whose home had a flag flown upside down in front of it, that flag in solidarity with the insurrection and the insurrectionists, and a second justice whose wife was actively involved in planning the coup. Not to mention, every day that goes by without a ruling on whether Trump is immune from prosecution is another day that Trump gets closer to avoiding accountability for the crimes committed on January 6th. Here's what the president said about Trump and the court.
The next president is likely to have 2 new Supreme Court nominees. 2 more. He's already appointed 2 that have been very negative in terms of the rights of individuals. The idea that if he's reelected, he's going to appoint 2 more flying flags upside down is really, I really mean it.
Could this be the scariest part of all of it?
Well, I think it is one of the scariest parts of it. Look, the Supreme Court has never been as out of kilter as it is today. I mean, never.
The Biden re-election campaign bringing Donald Trump's felony conviction and his disregard for the rule of law front and center in the 2024 presidential campaign is where we start today. Former U.S. Senator, co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast, Claire McCaskill, is here. Also joining us, Princeton University professor and distinguished political scholar, our friend Eddie Glaude is back. Also joining us, former RNC spokesman, the host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller's here, and former top official at the Department of Justice, MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissman's back with us. Claire, I start with you. I just want to put this out there. I think the campaign needs to start with these big buys to send a signal to even its top surrogates about what the message is. I've had some of the best Biden surrogates on. They've all got a 6-minute answer to what the campaign's about. And something about an ad like this focuses the mind of the country and the voters as well as the spokespeople.
Yeah, Nicole, as you know, and I know somewhat painfully, good campaigns are based on repetition and discipline. You say the same things over and over again to the point that you frankly just like go, please don't make me say it again. But repetition works. And I think sometimes surrogates forget that what seems obvious to them is not obvious to everyone. I mean, keep in mind, we've seen polling where there was a huge chunk of voters that thought somehow Joe Biden was responsible for Roe v. Wade being overturned. I mean, that's how, frankly, disengaged the voters are that are going to decide this election. So the sooner the Biden White House sends very clear signals about a very crisp message, and they begin to repeat it until all of us who pay close attention get tired of it, the minute we're really tired of it is the minute it may start working.
That's exactly right. And then, you know, about 3 weeks longer. Tim Miller, someone who got the memo, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. Let me show you what he had to say.
Donald Trump was convicted of 34 counts by a jury of his peers after being held liable for rape. And the discussion at the water cooler is whether that should be an issue in the presidential race. Remember, there are 54 more indictments to be adjudicated. We're already in the pot, folks. Republicans have been increasing the temperature for 8 years. We better hop out soon, or it's going to boil us all to death. And MAGA is laughing at us while they turn up the heat. They preach law and order, all while Republican leaders show up in a courtroom in New York City paying fealty to their felonious king.
Tim, I love this. I mean, this is the whole thing, right? I mean, this is Trump, who he is, and this is MAGA, what they're doing. We are all in the pot. Someone had to say it.
Yeah, more J.B. Pritzker, please. Maybe get that guy on Fox or into the swing states. Because I agree with you, Nicole. Sometimes there is just a lack of clarity from people who are supportive of the president about like what the message here, what the contrast is here. The Biden ad at the very end of it, I think, sums it up pretty well. That Donald Trump only cares about himself, and Joe Biden's actually working for you. That's a good message. But then the details of what Donald Trump has done and what he's been held liable for. I think my favorite thing in that ad and in the J.B. Pritzker comments is that they are bringing up the fact that he has been held liable for sexual assault. And in addition to that, in the ad, bring up the fact that he committed business fraud twice, really. One in the more recent case, but then in the Trump University case as well. A lot of people don't know this, to Clara's point. A lot of people, you know, a lot of experts, a lot of media pundits and know-it-alls have been like, well, after the Access Hollywood tape, Trump won anyway, so the voters don't care about his, you know, propensity for sexual assault. That's just not true. Some voters don't care. Some MAGA voters don't care, but there are some voters that do not know the story of E. Jean Carroll, of Summer Zervos, of all these other women that have been assaulted by Trump. And I think doing an ad that leans into that message, that talks about his criminality, not just in the Bragg case, but his pattern of criminality, including January 6th, is a strong contrast that we see in polls can work, but, you know, they've got to drive it. And so this ad does a good job getting that moving.
Well, because I have you, and because you're good at forcing me to rethink the way I was going to have these conversations, Tim, an ad, we all know, I mean, even in the old information era, an ad wasn't enough. What does the rest of it look like? I mean, what do? You paint a bus with jail bars on it and you drive around circle. I mean, what do you do? What does the rest of the campaign look like to make sure people know just the adjudicated facts about Trump? Forget about the things he probably won't be tried for before the election, but just the adjudicated liability and criminality. What do you do? How do you make sure people know that?
Yeah, look, the ad is a good start. I'm concerned. I think there are a lot of experts that are concerned about what's happening on TikTok, talking to younger voters. We can get the J.B. Pritzker clips, but they need other clips, getting the celebrities out there, getting the influencers online with very short, very to-the-point messages about Trump's history of, you know, Trump's crimes, Trump's sexual assaults. I think that's extremely important. And frankly, I've got nothing but respect for the vice president. But traditionally, like, that has been the vice president's role, to be an attack dog. And I think that maybe that there are legitimate concerns that relate to misogyny or whatever about having a female vice president, the first female vice president, being an attack dog. But she was a prosecutor. And Joe Biden, for all of his strengths, I don't think prosecuting this is his top strength, let's just say. I think it could be Kamala Harris's top strength. And I think it includes more from her and from other people in the cabinet as well, carrying the message.
Ben Rhodes, you wrote a book about this a few years ago, almost a canary in the coal mine, right? We weren't even talking about autocracy. And maybe that was one of the mistakes, right? But what Ian's talking about, the things that are given away freely, is the first page of Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, right? That the autocrat, it isn't just what they grab, it's what's given to them freely. And this piece about agency is what I want to ask you about. I mean, I think the best thing about the failure of the federal criminal justice system to try Trump, and we can blame the Supreme Court. We should blame the Supreme Court. I do it every day. But the inability to try Trump for crimes that took place on all of our TVs, right? He incited a riot whose mission statement was to, quote, hang Mike Pence and keep him in power after he lost in a free and fair election, so declared by his own Chris Krebs, his own administration, Bill Barr, all the way down the line, is meant to disorient and deflate the vote. But the only people who have had nothing taken from them yet are the voters. Tell me how this conversation plays out over the next 5 months.
Well, look, I think one of the things that's been challenging is that people don't understand, and Ian referenced this, the difference this time around versus the last time. I won't belabor the point. But the simple truth is I was in the Obama White House when Trump was elected the first time. And when the Trump transition team came in, chaired by Chris Christie, for the meeting where you talk about what people they want to appoint and what kind of offices they want to shadow, they had no transition plan because they didn't think Trump was going to win. And so it is night and day. And I think people are conditioned to think, well, if Trump's elected this time, it'll be just like the last time. And that's just not the case here. We have 8 years, and they've done a lot of work in those 8 years. And that work is both looking at the United States and how they can essentially completely remake American government. And they've tested the boundaries of where the system is soft and where they can make real headway in dismantling, essentially, checks and balances. And they also can draw from an autocratic playbook that is global, right? And that's what part of what I was writing about. They looked at what Viktor Orban did to kind of transform a liberal democracy into a single party autocracy, essentially, in a period of years. And so they're coming in with a playbook. Now, I think the key with ordinary people, Nicole, we've seen this. I'm going to reference the recent elections in Europe, where you saw the gains made by far-right parties. What I was really struck by, Nicole, though, is that the far-right parties made the most gains in places like France and Germany, where the incumbents were big defenders of the establishment. And actually, you saw the far-right do less well in places where they've had control or where they've been more prominent in the government. The UK, we have a party in the Tories, a right-wing party, that is about to get clobbered. So I don't think that it's necessarily the case that only the far right has momentum. The warning sign, and this gets to your question about how to make this clear to people about their agency, is to not just talk about defending some kind of vague establishment that people are upset with to begin with. The point is that Donald Trump wants to dismantle this democracy to take care of himself and his friends. And he wants to use that power to hurt you. You have to make this real to people, that essentially it's going to lead to a completely distorted economy that is going to favor the rich and powerful over working people. It's going to completely distort the justice system to protect Trump and his own interest and not to defend the rights of ordinary people. This cannot just be a kind of academic discussion about democracy. It has to be about the fact that Trump wants to do this for himself and at your expense. And that's the kind of message that has worked in other countries over the last few years, where we've seen this push and pull between democracy and autocracy. These can't just be concepts. They have to be things that are made real to people.
Well, President Biden does it in an increasingly effective way. President Obama's convention speech really is a blueprint. I won't say the only one, but one of the blueprints. I mean, tell me, Ben Rhodes, who you think the most effective messengers are this cycle, this time around.
You know, what's interesting about this time around is I think President Biden is going to have to increasingly focus on this kind of message that we've been talking about. You know, not just you enter the prime time of the campaign, and it's less and less about just talking about your record and more about really sharpening the choice for people. But the reality is, I think we're in a time when people really know Joe Biden. He's been around for a very long time. They know Donald Trump. He's been around for a very long time. I think the most effective messengers are going to be all of us. And this is what Ian was talking about. You know, it's actually going to be incumbent upon citizens to go around and make the case for why this is something not worth doing. Some people may be very enthusiastic about voting for Joe Biden, but I think this election is going to turn just as much on people who might not like everything about Joe Biden. And you have to get to those people, and you have to communicate to those people, hey, look, there's no perfect choice in politics here, but there is a wrong choice, a very wrong choice in this election, you know? And I think, sure, you want to empower a surrogate operation. I think you want to get Democratic politicians who've been effective in this era. You just played one of them, Wes Moore, in your previous clip. You want to get them out around the country talking to people. But I think really importantly in the home stretch, there's going to have to be a real concerted effort made to empower citizens and organizers to get out and be those extra voices. That's what Barack Obama did. It wasn't just his rhetoric. He essentially recruited an army of field organizers who were able to take this message on the road. Now, in this case, I think it's going to have to be Joe Biden and a Democratic Party that is offering a clear choice with Donald Trump, but also really empowering people to make whatever message they think is most effective in their communities. It's going to be a different message in Pennsylvania than it's going to be in Arizona. In some places, it's going to focus on reproductive freedom as something that is being taken away because there might be a referendum on the ballot. In other places, an economic message is going to be more important. The common thread, though, on all these things with Trump is that he's going to put himself and his own interests, his autocratic interests, above you, whether it's talking about abortion, whether it's talking about the economy. And that's the thing that can hold this together.
Kim, let me show you Steve Bannon's plan for a second term.
We're coming after Lisa Monaco, Merrick Garland, the senior members of DOJ that have prosecuted President Trump, Jack Smith. And this is not about vengeance. This is not about revenge. This is not about retribution. This is about saving this republic. We're going to use the Constitution. Let me tell the people that have done that to President Trump, whether you're in the federal government or whether you're down in the state of Georgia or you're in Arizona or you're in Michigan, we are going to go and we're going to get every single receipt. And to the fullest extension of the law, you are going to be investigated, prosecuted, and incarcerated, okay?
This is like a blowhard fest. Of course, that's all completely detached from reality. But the disinformation and the emotion attached to the disinformation is deep and it is animating. And I wonder, Kim, what your thoughts are about how you make the facts and the reality and the democracy as animating.
Yeah, well, clearly here you see Steve Bannon going after the pillars and all of the people and the institutions that have held Donald Trump accountable and who have, or at least are in the process of trying to hold Donald Trump accountable. So it's very predictable that this would be a message. But you have to try to speak, and I've been spending the better part of many years trying to do this, trying to break through that noise and talk about what the rule of law is and what it's meant to uphold, and that this is an attack on the rule of law because an autocracy needs an attack on the rule of law. But it's not just important in terms of an election in order to prevent this autocracy from taking hold, right? What Steve Bannon is talking about and what he is signaling, pointing out officials in places like Georgia or Michigan or Arizona, where the people who engaged in trying to stop the results of the 2020 election, the vote of the people, from being counted and being certified is really dangerous. Michigan is, of course, a state where there was a plot to kidnap the governor there because of her efforts in part to protect people from the pandemic and also to restore democracy and ensuring that everyone had the right to vote there in Michigan. So putting a target on these folks is extremely dangerous. That's something to remember. But also Donald Trump doesn't want accountability. Steve Bannon tried to wink there and say it's not about revenge. But Donald Trump has said very clearly that it is about revenge. And since his enemies went after him, if he is back back in power, he will go after his enemies. This is the clearest, most dangerous message that he has said since January 6th, when he sicked a crowd of supporters who he knew to be armed on the Capitol. This is really one of the most dangerous messages, and we can't underscore that enough to the American people so that they know clearly what the choice is in November.